Morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on which coast or side of the pond you're on, and welcome to episode 3 of our new special feature on Across the Pitch, where we're ultimately trying to determine who was the worst signing in the entire English Premier League 2010 through 2020. On Thursday, Ross Devonport gave us the 2 worst signings for Bournemouth. Yesterday, we had David Walker on, giving us the 2 worst signings for Manchester City. Today, we have someone that you'll be very familiar with if you listen to the show on a regular basis. None other than our very own Tony Robinson is on to represent Burnley. And myself, Phil Kennedy, and Ross Devonport are going to chat with Tony about who he thinks his 2 worst signings for Burnley were from 2010 through 2020. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Nice to be back on with you, Phil, and nice to speak to Ross. I'm a fan of your work, so I'm looking forward to our chat together.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be a lot of fun here. Now, Ross, why don't you go ahead and give us, to start off with, who were your 2 worst picks for Burnley? And then the 2 picks from David Walker, so we know the 4 players that we have so far.
Oh, for Bournemouth, you mean?
Yeah, I hope he's given the ones for Bournemouth.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Ross, who were the 2 players that you had for Bournemouth, and then who were the 2 that David gave us yesterday, just so we kind of have the lineup set here before Tony gives us the picks for Burnley today.
I was going to hang up. You didn't need me anymore.
Well, my 2 for Bournemouth were, one of them was relatively easy. That was obviously Jordan Ibe. And my number 2 was Lee Tomlin. I'm trying to think, for Manchester City, we had Mangala. I thought you might be able to help me out with the second one. I can't remember his name now.
It was...
Bonnie. Wilfred Bonnie.
Bonnie, yeah. Wilfred.
That's the one I shouldn't forget, yes.
So it was Bonnie and Mangala for Manchester City, and then you had Short Ibe, and who was your other one for Bournemouth?
That was Lee Tomlin.
Lee Tomlin. Okay, so those are the 4 players, and then Tony, why don't you start off by giving us who was the number 2 guy that you had for Burnley and why?
Okay. I just wanted to sort of touch on some similarities between Bournemouth and Burnley, really, before we get going. Obviously, Eddie Howe, who's at Bournemouth, was at Burnley and then left, and Sam Dice took over. And I think they both ranked number 1 and 2 in tenureship in the Premier League by a week apart. So it was nice to have Eddie Howe at Burnley, but obviously he's doing a bang-up job at Bournemouth, and hopefully he'll keep you guys up. Can I give a couple of honorable mentions first before we get into the picks?
Absolutely. Who are your honorable mentions? So we'll discuss that first.
Okay. Well, I've got a couple under the loanee section, which I didn't consider as the number 1 or 2 pick because I didn't think the loanees would meet the criteria that we wanted to achieve. But honorable mentions in the loanee section would be obviously Danny Drinkwater from this year, who had a terrible time at Burnley. Another one would be a fellow that came over from Liverpool, a fullback, John Flanagan, that came over highly touted and never really got a chance. And then Patrick Bamford, who was a Chelsea player and also played at Burnley and really didn't pan out. This was a tough one for me because as people know, Burnley are a team that doesn't splash out a lot of money. Their signings are generally few and far between. And Sean Dyche, when he picks somebody, usually gets the right man and does his due diligence. But obviously you're not going to hit the ball out of the park on every one. And a couple names, one would be that some people either hate him or love him, was Joe Hart. And he came over and obviously played a few games in the season when Tom Heaton was injured. He got a lot of stick because Burnley were in a poor run of form at the time. And then when Tom Heaton came back, the back four also in front of him was consistent. The team started to play well. So Joe Hart took a lot of stick, and I don't think it was all his fault. But he is an honorable mention for a person that could be considered. Another one would be a player that actually Eddie Howe had. And I love the comment that Eddie Howe said about this individual. His name was Brian Easton, a Scottish player. He was came down, not a big money back in the day, 2009 to 2012. He paid £350,000. But he played 33 matches, did get one goal, but he was sat on the bench by Eddie Howe. And the comment was, we're moving in a different direction, so I don't see the point in playing someone who won't be here next season. So I think that tells you a lot. I think that tells you a lot about a player and the future with the club.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was fantastic. What are your thoughts on those honorable mentions, Ross?
Yeah, I didn't remember the name Brian Easton. Obviously, I remember Eddie Howe leaving from Bournemouth to Burnley was obviously a sore spot for a lot of Bournemouth fans. And obviously, he came back obviously in the end and brought us to the Premier League. So we kind of we don't think of it as bad as we perhaps could have been if we were still down in the first or second division. But yeah, Joe Hart's an interesting one, and we'll get to the Brian's number two, which is listed as a striker. And Bournemouth and Burnley have had some good striker transfers over the years with Danny Ings and Sam Vokes. So interesting to see about his number two here.
Another one that was in my process of elimination would be Robbie Brady, and the reason I'm mentioning him is because of the price tag. It was £13 million at the time. Was almost, I don't know if it was a record, but pretty close to it at the time in 2017. And he came from Norwich, as I say, and really he's been unfortunate with injuries and has lost his place in the squad. So I didn't count him in my two, but I think he's a mention because he can't really sort of crack into the team. Okay, so on to my two picks, and I'm going with number two is a gentleman, is a striker by the name of Lukas Djukovic. And he played at Burnley from 2014 to 2017. And he was an undisclosed fee, which is another translation for you pay too much money when they say it's an undisclosed fee. Now, he is a striker. He played 32 games for Burnley and scored 0 goals. And basically, my opinion of Lucas might be a bit harsh, but I always said that he couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat.
I'm just glad that you were the one who had to say that name and not me.
Well, I might be mispronouncing it, but I think I'm close. Now, he did have an injury, which kept him down in some of the games. But, as a striker, if you get in 32 appearances and you don't score, that's not good in anybody's books. And for that reason, I know I should add he's done well in the championship with Birmingham, but some strikers don't make it in the Premier League, and he's one of them. And so he's number two on my list. If we'd have done this show 2 months ago, Matty Vidra might have been on the list, but now that he's come through at Burnley, he's not even on the list at all. He's a success story now.
That's definitely a good thing to hear is that, sometimes a guy just takes some time to get going. Ross, what are your thoughts? I know that we've kind of had the same feeling that if a guy is a striker and has 1 or 0 goals to his name, that's probably not very good. So I think that you'll probably think that was a good pick.
No, for sure. And I just wanted to ask Tony, as a fan like me of a team that's been down in the lower divisions as well, what do you think? Djukovic was obviously a capable striker at the championship level. Tony, what do you see as the sort of differences between what separates a championship striker from a Premier League one? Obviously, other than being able to put the ball on the back of the net.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a lot of it has to do with your the style of play the team works with, and Burnley do a 4-2-2, and they have a sort of a old traditional centre forward like a Chris Wood or like a Djukovic, and you need somebody to play the ball off of them, and you need midfielders to feed the ball. And Burnley like to obviously do the long ball from the wing backs and get it into the box. He just had trouble really handling that style of play, and his distribution to his strike partner wasn't the best. So I just don't think he seemed to his style of play seemed to fit in the way Burnley's system, and he just didn't cut it. And sometimes when that happens, you get labeled as a championship player, and nobody else wants to take a chance. And I think that's what's happened.
Yeah, Sean Dyche is one of those old school guys that's sort of sticking with that 4-4-2. Eddie Howe did that for a little while. In the championship, it was sort of we had a false nine kind of playing behind the nine. But yeah, some guys just seem to fit better in that one striker format. Bournemouth now have gone to the wing back system, the sort of 4-5-1 or 5-4-1, however you want to look at it. But yeah, maybe it's fitting guys into a system. It can be difficult. Sometimes it's better just to sort of fit your system around who you have.
Yeah, and I think he's gone with the 4-4-2 system. I think out of when he first started with Burnley because of the players he had, but now he brings players in to fit that system. He might switch the odd time to a 4-3-3, but he very rarely goes with less than 4 at the back. So it's getting the players for the system, and I just don't think Djukovic was one that worked. And once you fall out of favor with Sean Dyche, that doesn't help, and that leads me in really to my number one pick if we're ready for that.
Well, one thing I did just want to comment in terms of what you were just talking about on that teams that move up from the Premier League to the Championship. It seems that usually whatever teams are getting promoted are able to be successful in terms of offense in the Championship. When teams do get promoted, it seems like the teams that change to more of a defensive format, like a Burnley or like a Sheffield United this year, tend to be more successful, where the teams that just keep trying to come out firing, like Fulham last year or Norwich this year, tend to be less successful. And that really translates to the strikers, because like if you look last season in the Championship, top 2 scorers were Teemu Pukki and Billy Sharp. Billy Sharp hasn't really scored a whole lot, hasn't even started a lot of games. Pukki has been one of the top scorers, but if you look at it, that individual success for Pukki hasn't translated to his team. Meanwhile, Sharp taking the step back, Sheffield United has changed their play. And I think that's kind of what it is with Burnley, is when they moved up from the Championship, they just had to play more of counter-attacking style. And if you have an aggressive striker, that's just not going to fit his game.
No, I was going to say with Bournemouth, it was very similar to that. When we came up the first 3 years, we were giving up a ton of goals. We were also scoring enough goals to keep us up. But Eddie Howe realized going into this previous full season that we really needed to change things up on the defensive side of things. You brought in Diego Rico. Obviously, Nathan Ake came in as well. We need to shore things up at the back. It hasn't helped us as much this year, but a lot of injuries this year, obviously. But yeah, it definitely seems to be the sort of recipe to have some success when you don't have the overall talent that some of these top six teams may have, is just to play that defensive style and hit them on the counter. I think Burnley has done a great job of that this year. Yeah,
I think you're right with defensively. Burnley has once they solidified that back four and with the strikers they have. I mean, we've been fortunate that when the strikers gone down, the other players that they've got stepped in. Jay Rodriguez has been, I think, a great signing. And Vidra just obviously needed a chance and came on. And it gives you options with, you've got Barnes that's coming back from an injury, and Wood. You've got 4 strikers that you could have several different combinations. And each one, really, if they get playing time, has the potential to get 10 goals. And if you can get 3 strikers out of 4 with 10 goals, you're going to stay up in the Premier League any day of the week.
Definitely agree with that. I think it'd be a good time where we move on to your second, or excuse me, your first pick, and as we kind of said, this is the guy that gets the bye into the first round proper of the worst sightings bracket. Who is your number one worst sighting for Burnley 2010 to 2020, Tony?
Well, I got to go with Ben Gibson, and a lot of people might say that he didn't get a chance, but I think in anything he's gone down on the depth chart, really. Now, he was brought in, obviously, behind Ben Mee and James Tarkowski. I think at the time there was worries that Tarkowski could be leaving and wanted by bigger clubs. However, that didn't pan out. But Ben Gibson, I think in training, I don't think he showed what the desire that Sean Dyche likes to see. Definitely his attitude has been an issue to the point where he's training now with Middlesbrough, doesn't even train with the club. He was signed for a record fee of 15 million, I say joint record, tied with Chris Wood. So you pay 15 million, and he played. Oh, he did actually get one PL start. I'll give him that, but he scored. So that doesn't sound too bad. But actually, the team lost 5-1 to Everton. So you got to take it in perspective. And he played 2 matches in the Europa League. One, he got a yellow card, and the other, he got a red card. So I think if you weigh everything up in the big picture and look at the fact we paid 15 million and he's not with the team, Ben Gibson is my worst signing of the decade.
Well, I think it's hard to argue with that. What do you think, Ross?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Does he have some connection with the chairman, Tony, if I remember correctly?
Well, I think he was related to the chairman at Middlesbrough.
Oh, at Middlesbrough. Okay, that's I kind of remember him being in a relationship. And obviously, both of these have a former Middlesbrough connection. We were talking about in my podcast about some of the signings that Liverpool have thrown our way that really haven't panned out. There's sort of a strained relationship now with the fans and in relation to that and Liverpool. But is there any animosity with Middlesbrough? I mean, any more than normal? It'd be nice to see if they could get back up in the Premier League.
Well, I don't think we've had good luck with Middlesbrough because I think Djukovic might have played at Middlesbrough as well.
He did. Both of them did, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Bamford might have as well. But it just didn't pan out for Gibson. And I think most of all, and we find this out in our player interviews with Stanley, is that a big thing is character and your attitude. And if you don't have that, doesn't matter how talented you are. If you don't have that right attitude, you're not going to go places, and not in a team run by Sean Dyche. So and the money factor, pay 15 million pounds. So as I say, I there's others that could be, people may disagree with my choice, but I think if you look at the overall package, I think it's a pretty decent pick.
Yeah, I mean, I saw there was some interest for Gibson, I guess, in the January transfer window, but I just assumed that the offer was nowhere near what they wanted. But as you said, if he's got the attitude problem, potentially a cancer in the locker room, sometimes you just have to kind of cut your losses. And obviously, the longer it goes on, the closer you get towards the end of his contract, the value is going to go down even more.
Yeah, I think it devalues his attitude devalues his price, doesn't it? It's obviously team's not going to want to pay top dollar for a player that has got the poor attitude. And I think Sean Dyche is respected enough that people will take that into consideration when looking at a player.
Yeah, Eddie and Sean, they have that common theme that they don't suffer fools. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yep.
And one thing I did just want to touch on real quick here, because our regular listeners know you as the Canadian Accringtonian. Mr. Accrington lived on Stanley Street himself. However, in the 1970s, Accrington would have been in the 9th division, and Burnley is just about 5 miles up the road from Accrington. So you do have quite a long history of attending games at Burnley, don't you?
Oh, well, yeah. When I grew up in Accrington in the 60s, obviously Stanley went out of the league in 62. And I was getting at that age where I wanted to watch a football team. And in early 65, I wanted to go to a team. And so I got a job taking papers and bought a junior season ticket at Burnley. And I used to go every second Saturday to watch Burnley at Turf Moor. And, back in the day when they had a really good team and obviously developed a love for Burnley. But with Stanley coming back in, then, I have obviously a passion for Accrington Stanley. Also, both towns are founding members of the Football League. So I take a lot of pride in supporting two town teams that have been around for a while.
There you go. Wasps were supposed to be one of the founding members of the Rugby Football Union, but they missed the meeting because they went to the wrong pub, allegedly.
Oh, no.
I read that. That was interesting. I did read that. I think might be more to that story, don't you think, Ross?
Oh, I think so. Somebody knows something, or there's something written down somewhere that we haven't quite got to yet.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that we have two great selections for Burnley. Going on into next week, we're going to be doing this every day for 20 days, getting the two worst sightings for each Premier League team. And then we're going to have all kinds of fun polls and things. So if you're not following at Across Pitch on Twitter, make sure you're doing that. Also follow at that Ross bloke, Ross Devonport. And then Tony is on Twitter at ToneCat54. That's ToneCat 54. And I'm, of course, Phil Kennedy at Aki Rising, ACCYRISING. Follow all of us on Twitter, and we will be posting lots of updates about the upcoming bracket specials.
Sounds good.
I just want to say thanks for allowing me to be a guest. It's been great being on this side of the microphone for a change. Thank you.
You've been a pleasure to have on the show as always, Tony, and a fantastic job with your two picks. Ross, did you have any parting thoughts on Burnley before we wrap up?
No, listen, they've had some great lower money signings over the years, and they haven't had too many stinkers. So I was proud of Tony for coming up with a couple. There, he did a good job.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you, Ross.
All right, guys, it's been a blast. And Ross, I will talk with you again tomorrow.
Yeah, cheers, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers, Phil.
Cheers. Have a good one, guys.